Welcome to Rabbit Trails for Cyborg Bunnies. As I've said before, I have just discovered the new philosophical paradigm of critical realism. This is a more holistic approach than empiricism or positivism, and more scholars are adopting this methodology to provide a deeper, richer understanding to various philosophical issues. On this journey of discovery, I came across a lecture by Steve Ash, online at the Center for Critical Realism, in which he presents the core concepts of his books explaining morality, critical realism, and moral questions. This book is based on his PhD thesis, and during his doctoral research, he found that most philosophical models were insufficient to explore whether a universal morality could in fact exist. In this day and age where subjective morality is widely accepted, he felt a fresh perspective was needed to see if objective value could be substantiated. It is that fresh perspective, morality viewed through the lens of critical realism, that his book, his lecture, and my critique of it are about. Ash begins his lecture by explaining his use of a single moral issue, that of slavery, where there is wide popular consensus today that slavery is bad, to focus on the mechanisms of critical realism, rather than trying to explain morality in broad terms and arguing rightness or wrongness on a case-by-case basis. The issue of slavery also provided Ash with an example of how social morality changes over time, as does legal positions on moral issues. He points out that 150 years ago, the laws regarding slavery were focused on slave owners' rights over their property, rather than focusing on moral laws of whether it is permissible to own another human being, which is the focus of the law today. Hence, what is legally permissible is not always morally good, and the study of morality is somewhat problematic. Each chapter in Ash's book discusses a specific question in the following order. Number 1, can we legitimately argue for a specific moral position or set of values? Number 2, can moral positions be understood to apply universally? 3, how do considerations of morality inform our choices and actions? 4, how can we understand morality as an aspect of society? 5, how can we develop a greater understanding of morality? And chapters 6 and 7 cover question number 6. Can these critical realist moral theories provide an explanation of morality as an aspect of reality? So while chapters 1 through 5 of his book deal with wider issues of morality in general, chapters 6 and 7 deal with questions regarding critical realism to the conversation specifically. So, starting with question 1, can we legitimately argue for a specific moral position or set of values? Ash states that the human distinction between facts and values has been at the heart of moral philosophy for over 400 years. This statement could easily be overlooked, but that is part of his core paradigm, that the distinction is not necessarily a real one, but merely human perception of the distinction that is real. As this perception has a massive impact on how science approaches morality, Ash turns to Bhaskar's ontology of critical realism to argue against the fact-value distinction. Bhaskar states that in some circumstances, using social science, you can deduce an explanation of an aspect of society using no other aspect other than the valuing of the truth. In other words, you can make a truth judgment by measuring it against an objective truth. There are, of course, a great many people who do not believe in objective truth. There are also several schools of thought that believe you cannot use rationality to inquire into morality. However, as Ash has stated, that is the very heart of moral philosophy, and most modern thinkers are muddling their way towards a greater understanding. That is why Ash sees critical realism as a necessary paradigm. What we can see and observe is subjective to speculative value. Different people observe the same event, yet place different interpretations on the same data. Empiricism and positivism claim an objectivity to the data observed, yet both rely on the theory of the data, not the event itself. Critical realism says that what you are observing is the structure that generates the event, but the structure can only be seen in its effects. Ash claims that one can experiment using naturalism to identify those underlying structures. You still need to take those potential models, your understanding of what kind of structures would generate the results, and test them in a more objective fashion to see if your theories are close to the truth, utterly false, or where on the spectrum of reality they fall. Once the structure is identified and verified, you also need to see how that structure works in conjunction with other social structures. Returning to his example of slavery, Ash details a graph to show the massive amounts of social interaction in play for a slavery-free society that is taken for the norm today. We live in a society that worships empiricism, laboratory-tested, repeatable science. But as Ash and the graph point out, there are so many interconnecting structures, it would be utterly impossible to isolate a single structure and measure its effect accurately. Thus, while empiricism is a useful tool in understanding the material universe, it offers limited value to understanding the wider scope of the social sciences. You can isolate a single structure or focus using critical naturalism. Ash states that for a slavery-free society to exist, human rights must be valued for all. This thesis can be examined two different ways, which leads into question 2, can a moral position be understood to apply universally? One can say morality exists because of a universal aspect of reality. Or one can say morality exists and becomes universal. In the first, morality would exist whether we know it occurs or not. Its existence is entirely independent of our feelings and perceptions about morality. So the statement, human rights are valued for all, would be true because there is something intrinsically valuable about all human beings. We would then have rights that arise from that value. The fact that many people do not believe this would have no effect on the moral truth of that statement. The second way of saying there are universal morals is stating that through a process of trial and error, what is actually moral becomes known and agreed upon by the majority and declared to be moral law. The current Universal Declaration of Human Rights is seen as such an aspiration. It is seen as a universal because most people today agree we would all like to be treated as if it were true, if there were such a thing. And anyone who disagrees with it is a bad person. The problem with the second type of moral universalism is that once a majority have agreed upon a self-labeled moral law, it is then enforced upon the whole of society. Interjecting my own point of view here, there is a staggering amount of people who do not agree with universal human rights. Any communist or totalitarian government does not agree. The Chinese Communist Party and Vladimir Putin were very open at the beginning of this year, publicly stating they do not recognize any inherent human rights. Only those limited and stratified quote-unquote rights that are granted by the state are recognized as existing. The second type of universalism accommodates that utilitarian ethic. The quote, majority, i.e., those who can enforce their way of thinking on others. Therefore, it becomes a universal moral law to obey those in power. The second type of moral universalism was also what instituted slavery for thousands of years. Thus, using the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as an example of the second approach to universal morality holds a kinda high degree of irony. Generally, what we've seen from history is that mob rule does not do a very good job at uncovering a universal truth about human flourishing. No matter what theories philosophers and theologians come up with, those theories always seem to be commandeered into mere slogans by politicians and kings seeking unlimited power over us. It would seem logical, then, that if such a universal morality does exist, it must be of the first kind, an aspect of reality that is both universal and moral, existing beyond humanity's limitations in time and space. Thank you for listening, and join me next time as I go a little deeper into morality and critical realism on rabbit trails for cyborg bunnies.